everyone, I'm Kato, and in today's video, I played 30 Days in Discounty. Discounty is a cozy supermarket management and life sim set in the small town of Blomkast. On the surface, it's all about running your discount store, stocking shelves, helping customers, and growing your business. But underneath that daily grind, this town is hiding a lot more. So my ultimate goal is to balance the chaos of the store while also trying to uncover all of the mysteries that Blomkast has to offer. My journey in Discounty began on a bus ride into the town of Blomkast with a driver who asked far too many questions for someone that I'd just met. When I arrived, my first task was to find Aunt Teller. She wasted no time leading me to my new job and giving me a hard time for being late. And somewhere between her lecture and sighs, she did mention that the fate of Discounty was in my hands. No pressure. Once I was inside, I met Grace, who was tucked away in the storage room at the very back of the shop. She introduced herself as the executive shop assistant and handed me my own personal digital assistant, which would help me keep track of all of my store tasks. She also gave me a tool belt, which would allow me to carry multiple items at once, which was super helpful. Soon after that, it was time to meet the delivery driver. And for some reason, I felt like waiting by the front door was appropriate, but the delivery bay was actually right next to the storage room. And that's where I finally met Guy, who brought me 3 shelves and 2 coolers. So I placed them on the shop floor, then returned to Grace for my crash course in stocking. The process was simple. Deliveries arrived in cooler boxes and crates. They went into storage, and from there, I stocked the shelves on the main floor. Once everything was stocked, Grace decided it was time for a trial run, which meant it was time for me to learn how to use the cash register. Using the register was easy enough. Just look up the item's price, multiply by the quantity, and then charge the customer without shortchanging or accidentally robbing them. After we were finished with the trial run, Grace sent me home to get ready for the grand opening tomorrow, and Aunt Teller was kind enough to walk me home, revealing that I would be living in the trailer in her backyard, which was conveniently located right next to the creepy shed. Nothing suspicious about that at all. The official grand opening of Discounty had finally arrived, but apparently I wasn't allowed to open the shop until I'd done some very last-minute advertising. So Aunt Teller handed me 3 posters and a map, instructing me to hang them at specific locations around town. So with the map in hand, I made my rounds, first to the bus stop, then the harbor, and finally the bar. When I returned, Aunt Teller gave her grand opening speech, a passionate declaration about Discounty being a testament to our superiority over our neighbors. I am so happy that I'm involved. Inside, I once again found Grace in her usual spot at the back of the storage room, and at this point I was starting to wonder if she ever actually left the storage room. She reminded me that I needed to keep the shelves stocked, and if we did run out of something, I could simply tell the customers it was sold out so they wouldn't get upset. By 9 a.m., the doors were officially open, and I was just hopeful that the people of Blomkast had a fondness for toilet paper and apples because that was most of what we had to offer. The day went surprisingly smoothly. Only one customer ended up getting upset, and that was because they were trying to come in as we were closing. By the end of my shift, Grace informed me I could now use the store's computer to place orders for more stock, and she even handed me 1,000 shills to get started. So I quickly ordered apples, toilet paper, soda, and skim milk, and the delivery arrived immediately. Now that's what I call service. After unloading and attempting to organize the storage room, I chatted with Grace one last time, and she told me that I was free to explore the town, but did warn me that I needed to be in bed before midnight, or else. So I wandered around for the rest of the evening, only to find that I couldn't access most of the locations that I wanted to go into. On the morning of day 2, I woke up to find a newspaper waiting in my trailer, complete with an article covering Discounty's grand opening from the day before. It feels good to be famous already. Stepping outside, I was greeted once again by Aunt Teller, who promptly escorted me to Eisenkram's hardware store, which was run by Ted Eisenkram. Aunt Teller instructed me to buy 2 more coolers and 2 more shelves, and mentioned that she needed to speak with me after work. So I picked up the supplies, exchanged a few pleasantries with Ted, and then headed back to the shop. Once inside, I set up the new shelves and coolers, stocked them, and prepared for another day behind the register. Customers trickled in steadily throughout the day, and I managed to keep everything stocked and sales running smoothly. When my shift ended, Aunt Teller was, unsurprisingly, already waiting outside for me. This time, she informed me that it would be my job to negotiate trade deals with some of the town's residents. Carl the farmer, Barbara, the owner of the Fishy Stick Factory, and Fisher, the fisher. I decided to start at the harbor where I met Barbara, and she explained that her and Aunt Teller had already been in talks of a trade deal, and she was willing to give me 2 crates of fishy sticks every week to sell at discounting. If I was able to sell enough, there would also be special perks in it for me, and so just like that, I had my first trade deal and 40 fishy sticks ready to go. Before calling it a day, I did stop by the hardware store again to pick up an extra cooler for my new inventory, and with everything set up and ready for the next workday, I headed home for some much-needed rest. My first task on day 3 was to continue tracking down the trade deals Aunt Teller had mentioned, so I started at the harbor where I met Fisher, a man who wasn't exactly thrilled to make my acquaintance. I asked if he'd be willing to sell me some of his fish to stock at discounting, but his answer was short and to the point. He told me no. So if I wanted fish, I was gonna have to talk to Barbara again. I went to find her and she explained that she gets everything that Fisher catches, but there might be room for a deal. She had a stockpile of Fishmas sticks, which were holiday-flavored fish sticks that she couldn't seem to sell. I can't imagine why. And if I could unload her leftover stock, she'd consider doing business with me. I begrudgingly agreed, grabbed the Fishmas sticks, and headed to the hardware store where Ted was more than happy to help and offered to give me an old aquarium that he claimed would make the Fishmas sticks seem more fresh. Back at discounting, Grace took the opportunity to point out the giant green bin, which was next to the computer in the storage room, and apparently it was a box compactor. So if I ever ended up with 3 of the same type of box or empty cooler, I could toss them in, flatten them, and then take them to the recycling station. I set up my new aquarium, which actually worked as a seafood booster and made the Fishmas sticks more appealing to customers. And after some much-needed store organization, we opened for another day of business, which turned out to be full of happy customers. When my shift ended, I placed a delivery order, compacted some empty boxes, and then headed towards the recycling station. But along the way, I came across a massive tree blocking the road to the north, which is where I met Carl, who introduced himself as the head of Clintmore Farm. He made it clear that he had issues with Aunt Teller, but he didn't go into any detail. Eventually, I reached the recycling station, and Ted gave me the rundown of how everything works. Cardboard goes in the cardboard bin, styrofoam goes in the styrofoam bin, and there's even a bin for old furniture. And best of all, recycling earns you a small compensation. I started the morning by confronting Aunt Teller about Carl, and she wouldn't give me any details about their falling out. She just brushed it off, saying he was sensitive. I pointed out to her that he couldn't even get home because of the massive tree blocking the road, and she casually blamed it on Elmer being too busy at the park to deal with it. And then she gave me my next task, gather all 8 of Carl's missing sheep from around the town and meet her at the park afterward. So I set off on my sheep hunt, and while searching, I noticed a toxic waste van parked suspiciously close to Discounty's entrance. So naturally, I went to investigate, and that's where I met Cornelius Key, a photojournalist who explained that the entrance to the forest had been blocked off because of a strange fog that was making people feel off. I had no way to help with the mysterious fog, so back to sheep hunting it was. After rounding up all 8 sheep, I headed to the park where I found them happily munching on every plant in sight. And Elmer, the park's unofficial caretaker, was not thrilled, which, as it turned out, was the whole point. Teller had set me up to annoy Elmer enough that he'd speed up the tree removal. I'm not sure if I should be happy or mad. When I finally made my way to Discounty for the day, Grace introduced me to the store's rewards program. Corporate would send me daily and weekly sales goals, and meeting those would earn points I could use to unlock new items for the shop. The workday went smoothly, and I even sold the last of the Fishmas sticks. For some reason, Aunt Teller wanted more, but I had to tell her we were sold out. And honestly, I think I did her a favor. After closing up, I headed down to the harbor to tell Barbara that the Fishmas sticks were finally gone. And true to her word, she sent me over to Fisher, who would now sell me fish too. For now, that just meant bony herring, but it was still my second official trade deal. I grabbed the herring, made a quick stop at the hardware store, and headed back to Discounty to get everything set up before calling it a night. The tree blocking Carl's road was already gone the next morning, which meant Teller's plan had worked perfectly. I headed up to Clintmore Farm to talk to Carl about a potential trade deal, and he agreed without any backlash, offering me Clintmore oats to sell at Discounty. So I accepted, grabbed my oats, and just like that, I had my third official trade deal. When I went to tell Aunt Teller the good news, she gave me a long speech about how useless Elmer was, and even though I tried steering the conversation back to my exciting new trade deals, she brushed me off and said that she couldn't tell me the next part of her plan until tomorrow. At Discounty, Grace was ready with yet another fun new responsibility, handing me a sponge and bucket for cleaning up messes that customers tracked in. Lucky me. I prepped the shop for the day, setting up my brand new produce booster to encourage customers to buy more fruits. But the more items I had to sell, the less shelf space I had for each one, which meant keeping everything stocked was getting more difficult by the day. When my shift ended, I got my first ever set of marketing stats, including performance, customer approval, items sold, and total sales. Grace explained that my performance rating determined how many customers would visit the next day, and each satisfied customer meant a little bit of extra cash. I could also use this screen to look at my advertising, which meant I needed to find a way to get more posters around town if I wanted more foot traffic. After stocking the store, I headed home, only to find Aunt Teller standing in my yard next to an empty soda can, looking extremely upset, and she launched into a rant about littering before handing me a plastic bag and telling me to collect any empty cans and bottles that I found. The only plus side is that I would be able to take them to the recycling station for a small payout. So I cleaned up, called it a day, and went to bed. I woke up to find Aunt Teller in my front yard again. Are we sensing a theme here? And today she told me it was time to expand Discounty. 6 days in and we're already talking expansion? I guess I'm doing a pretty good job. She told me we'd be taking over the tea and coffee shop next door, but first we would need Elmer's approval. So I headed over to the park to track him down, and Elmer thought it was a great idea, but the property's owner, Gina, lives out of town. Lucky for me, she works for Delivery Guy and drives through town regularly, and all I had to do was catch her the next time she came shopping at Discounty. After my chat with Elmer, I headed to work where I was immediately greeted by Teller, again. This time, she dropped another bombshell. Grace would no longer be working at Discounty. Her reasoning? Now that I'm here, there's nothing for Grace to do. I feel like I could use the help, but what do I know? Once inside, I contemplated what work was going to be like doing everything alone, and then I got started with my daily responsibilities. I placed a delivery order, stocked everything, and opened up for the day. Now, whether business was actually busier or it was just me panicking because I didn't have Grace there, I don't know. But this was easily the most chaotic shift that I'd had so far, sprinting between shelves, mopping up messes, checking out customers, and keeping an eye out for Gina. When she finally showed up, she told me that I would need to talk to Derek at the bank to handle the tea shop purchase. But then when I spoke to Derek, he kind of talked in circles about a license and a permit, and then told me that Elmer, who I talked to initially, was the one who would have to give me the approval. It almost seems like no one wants to be responsible for letting me buy the tea shop. Guess who was in my front yard waiting for me when I woke up? Yep. Aunt Teller. This time, she did have some good news. Apparently, we don't work on Sundays, which meant I had a day off. She even handed me a customers app so I could track every single person who shops at Discounty, because that's a totally normal thing to have. With my free time, I wandered into town and found Elmer at Town Hall, who gave me a crash course on the office printer. It turns out that I can finally make some more advertising posters, and he informed me that the town notice boards get cleared once a week, so if I wanted to keep my ads up, I'll have to print fresh ones regularly. While I was there, I decided to ask him about the expansion permit for the tea shop, and he said that he would give it to me if I did him a simple favor. The favor? Dispose of the stacks of paper piled up in his office. So I didn't ask any questions, grabbed the paper, took them to the recycling station, and I pretended like I didn't see what was written on them. And just like that, I had my expansion permit. So I brought it to Derek at the bank, who said we were good to go once I gave him 3,000 shills, which honestly wasn't too bad. but I didn't have that much today. I just needed a day or two of work, and that would be enough to cover it. The rest of the day I spent exploring. I chatted with Miss Anderson, who hinted that she might want someone to deliver her groceries. I met Hilda, who runs the local bar. I bumped into Grace, who revealed that she is Ted's wife, and she mentioned that the neighbors had put up a fence to block off half the road. And then there was Chester, who made it abundantly clear that he wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. On day 8, I woke up with one mission: make 3,000 shills so I could finally pay for the tea shop expansion. I headed straight to County, stocked the shelves, and opened the doors for what I hoped would be a huge sales day. And while it was successful, it wasn't quite enough. I had already used some of the County rewards points to expand the shop inventory previously, but I decided that it was time to use even more of those points, adding a few more items to the shop, and even expanding my pocket space. Still a little bit short on cash, I made a desperate trip to the recycling station to donate everything that I could, and somehow I ended the day with 2,999 shills. 1 shill short. The morning started with me overhearing Tammy, Grace's neighbor, screaming at Elmer. Something about him not approving her water filtration system. When I walked over, Elmer acted like nothing happened and instead launched into a speech about his passion for the park. So I figured it was none of my business. While wandering around town, I bumped into Derek and figured I would go ahead and hand over the 3,000 shills for the expansion, and he told me it would be ready tomorrow. The rest of the day was business as usual at County, except I had no money. So the entire day, I was just hoping that I didn't need to reorder anything because I wasn't going to be able to. I did, however, feel like I was really starting to get the hang of the cash register. When I returned home for the night, I found Aunt Teller outside, cleaning out the old shed next to my trailer. She told me that it used to belong to her ex-husband, Jurgen, and then, for the first time, she opened up to me about how he left her when she needed him the most. Apparently, she woke up one day, and he was just gone. Day 10 didn't exactly start with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Instead, Miss Anderson accused me of destroying Dale's legacy by buying his old abandoned tea shop. So that was fun. But honestly, I forgot all about her rant the second I walked inside to my brand new giant store. So much floor space, so much storage. I was so excited, I got right to work, ordering what I could afford, shuffling shelves around, and just mentally planning where everything was gonna go. Now, as the customers rolled in, they wasted no time sharing their opinions. Some of them loved the expansion, and others not so much. Personally, I didn't care because I was happy. After closing, I headed to the harbor to restock. I needed fish mystics from Barbara and herring from Fisher, and I ended the night chatting with Aunt Teller a little bit about our expansion, and she reassured me that things would cool down eventually. Another day, another County headline, except this one wasn't exactly glowing. Cornelius had apparently decided to write a full-blown article about me discounting our cultural heritage. Aunt Teller told me not to worry, but suggested that I track him down to sort things out before the day was over. On my search for Cornelius, I ran into Elmer twice. The first time, he mentioned that people had been complaining about the printer in Town Hall and that he was looking into upgrading it, which actually meant that he was waiting for me to pay for it. It was going to cost 500 shills, which I definitely didn't have to spare today. The second time, I found him outside his house, staring at a giant stork nesting in his chimney. And apparently, town law says that you can't move them. This town has a ton of rules and regulations. While trying to track Cornelius down, I did discover a new shop called Auntie's Antiques, which was run by Solruna. She was selling wallpaper, flooring, and furniture that I could use in County. So naturally, I bought the green floral wallpaper on the spot because look at how adorable it is. Later on, I noticed that the council van outside of the forest was gone, which meant the investigation had finally wrapped up. Teller was there to fill me in on the Lapley manufacturing plant, which was located deep in the forest, and she really wanted me to stock items from them. The problem, the road was still blocked, so she declared that it was my job to figure out a way in. I finally found Cornelius, but our chat was completely useless because he claimed that he was just reflecting the townspeople's opinions. So I reported back to Aunt Teller, and instead of sympathy, she told me that we needed to build a new supermarket. We just expanded. And then she told me in order to build the new supermarket, I needed to go to the bank and ask for a $25 million loan. I think she's officially lost it. Initially, at the bank, Derek laughed in my face, but then he said if I did actually want this loan, I needed to prove that Discounty was a real supermarket. And he had a set of 3 criteria. Number 1, operate like a real supermarket. I needed to upgrade all of my trade deals to Tier 2. Number 2, be known as a real supermarket. I needed to maintain a customer approval rating of over 50% for 4 consecutive days and hang at least 5 advertisement posters. And number 3, be profitable as a real supermarket. I needed to save up 8,000 shills. Doing all of that was going to take some time, but I feel like it was all achievable. When I finally made it over to Discounty, I put up the adorable green floral wallpaper and spent the rest of the day juggling customers, stocking shelves, and recycling everything that I could. I thought my day was over until I got home. And that's when a shadowy figure emerged, warning me to choose my next steps wisely and hinting that people weren't happy with me. But before I could figure out who it was, they disappeared. Today's focus was all about making progress. My first stop was Town Hall, where I started printing out a fresh batch of Discounty posters so I could work on the advertising around town. Next, I swung by the hardware store and grabbed an appealing cooler for better seafood sales and a household booster to help me sell more of the household products. Back at the shop, I spent a little bit of time rearranging, and then I ordered some more stock, and when Guy showed up with my delivery, he casually mentioned that he would be heading to Lapley Manufacturing. I finally had my way into the forest. He told me if I met him by Town Hall after work, he would sneak me into the back of the truck, and we would both be able to drive in that way. So I survived my shift and headed to meet Guy, and despite Miss Anderson trying to derail the entire plan, I still made it into the truck, and we headed to the forest. At the plant, I spotted Elmer leaving and introduced myself to Tammy, the CEO. I pitched the idea of doing business with her, but she wanted to test me and see how I treated my customers first. On the way home, I stopped back at Town Hall to check on my posters, only for Elmer to casually ask if I was in a relationship. So I quickly said no, changed the subject, and handed over 500 shills for the new printer upgrade. As I was starting the process of hanging up my posters, I came across Chester at the bus stop getting yelled at by his father. Apparently, instead of going to class and turning in his assignments, he's been hanging out in Sparkliff, a neighboring town, with some other friends. I think Chester needs to get his act together. The morning of day 13, I got the notification that I had officially maintained a customer approval rating of 50% for 4 days in a row, which meant I was one step closer to that loan. So I decided to start the day focused on getting the posters that I'd already printed hung up around town, and then getting the remaining ones that I needed printed off. On the way to work, I stopped by the abandoned house in town, where Cornelius was conveniently loitering nearby. So I asked him about the house, and it turns out it's a monument to his great-great-grandfather John Key, the inventor of the double-loop keyring. It was obvious that this house meant a lot to him, so I asked him the hard-hitting question. If the building is so important, why doesn't he take care of it? Ultimately, he told me that the funding got cut and he wasn't able to afford the upkeep anymore. At Discounty, I got everything prepped, knowing that Tammy was supposed to stop by. If I wanted that Lapley Manufacturing deal, I had to impress her. So when she came in, I made sure the store was clean, I checked her out with speed, precision, everything. But it wasn't enough. She was not impressed. She basically told me that I suck at my job, but she would give me another chance tomorrow. On my way home, I stopped at Town Hall to grab the rest of my posters, then headed down to the harbor to scope out some more advertisement spots. While I was there, I noticed that one of the stairwells was blocked, which was just another town mystery to add to the list. I ended the day by hanging out my final poster, which meant my first task to becoming a real supermarket was complete. I kicked off day 14 with a trip to Auntie's Antiques, and she had the cutest stuff in stock. So naturally, I bought almost all of it, went back to Discounty, and spent the morning decorating. Since it was Sunday, I had the entire day to reorganize without the chaos of customers. So my goal was to position every shelf and cooler so they would get the proper boost from my upgrades. In a perfect world, I would also reorganize things in a way that made logical sense, but this isn't a perfect world, and that could just be a problem for future me. Once I had things looking halfway decent, I made a stop at Town Hall to ask Elmer about the blocked off staircase at the harbor, and he explained that the railing was broken, but assured me that he would be taking a look at it. Now, considering this was an entire cliffside staircase, I wasn't exactly filled with confidence, but I guess we'll see. On day 15, the stairs were still not fixed. Not shocking. Maybe Elmer just needed a little bit more time, so I decided to give him one more day before nagging him again. Over at Discounty, I used some of my reward points to unlock a brand new item, bananas. While browsing the options, I also spotted a scanner upgrade, which looked amazing, so I decided that I would start saving up for that too. I placed my banana order, restocked my usual items, and just like that, I was ready for the day. With my new wallpaper, fresh flooring, and all of my cute decorations, I was sure that customers were noticing all of my hard work. But I don't know, maybe this guy hates floral wallpaper because he just got angry at me for no reason. In the chaos of the rush, I completely forgot that Tammy was supposed to stop by, and when I finally stepped outside, she was there waiting for me. Honestly, forgetting might have been a blessing because she told me that this time she was satisfied with my service. She even said that the road to the factory would reopen tomorrow. And then, in true Tammy fashion, she congratulated me on expanding, but also suggested that I should knock down the building next door and expand even more. I'm not sure if Cornelius will like that idea too much. I started the morning with a quick check on the harbor stairs, and once again, they still weren't fixed. So I guess I would be having another chat with Elmer later. From there, I headed into the forest and immediately ran into Tammy, who was already waiting to set up our trade deal. She announced that I would now be selling their latest product, fluoride toothpaste, which was a curious choice for a plastics company, but sure, I will sell the toothpaste. I walked away with another trade deal under my belt and a full stock of toothpaste, and while I was hauling my crates away, I swear I saw a group of rats having some sort of meeting, but maybe I'm just losing it. Back in town, I stopped by the hardware store for a few extra shelves, and then I hurried off to Discounty to get my toothpaste stocked. I made sure to place it right next to my household booster so it would fly off the shelves, and the day actually ended up being a huge success sales-wise. On my way home, I ran into Elmer, who told me that the stairs would be fixed tomorrow, which we both knew was a lie. So I just told him that I would take matters into my own hands and ask Guy if he knew someone who could help us. I also reported the rat situation, and even Elmer agreed that there's something strange going on with them. Day 17 started with a trip to the recycling station, but while I was sorting everything, I spotted the rats again. This time, I decided to report them to Ted, but he didn't seem the least bit concerned. In fact, he told me that they're harmless and that he even leaves out scraps of their favorite food from time to time. So who knows, maybe I should also try feeding them. After spending some time cleaning up some litter around town, I made my way to the harbor to check in on my trade deals. Barbara let me know that I'd sold enough fishy sticks to earn a perk point, so I used it to unlock a 25% purchase price reduction. I stocked up on fishy sticks, and then I popped over to Fisher, where I also had some perk points to spend. So I boosted my crate capacity to 20 items and grabbed the same 25% discount perk and restocked my herring supply. There wasn't too much going on at the shop today. Now that I had more shelf space, keeping things in stock was actually a lot easier, but my biggest struggle was trying to keep up with all of the prices of the expanded inventory. My memory is not good enough to remember them all, so I just constantly have to flip back and forth between all of the pages. As always, I ended the day doing one of my favorite things, and that was restocking the entire shop, because there's just something so satisfying about knowing that every shelf is ready to go the next day. I kicked off the morning by placing an order with Delivery Guy, not just because I needed stock, but because I also needed to talk to Guy. I filled him in on the ongoing staircase situation, and he suggested that I get in touch with Gina, who apparently runs a little contracting business on the side. Back at the shop, I rearranged things again, and once I was satisfied, I opened the doors and had a steady stream of happy customers all day. On my way home, I did make a quick stop to see Elmer, and I let him know that I had found a solution for the harbor stairs. He didn't exactly share my enthusiasm. Turns out, Gina is a very expensive hire. But at this point, I think it's worth it. Finally, on day 19, the stairs to the harbor were fixed. I went to thank Elmer, but there was definitely no gratitude on his part. Instead, he told me that the repair cost 30,000 shills, which they had taken from his park budget. But hey, it needed to be done. I swung by to see Tammy and realized that I'd already earned a perk point from all of my toothpaste sales, so I unlocked the crate upgrade. And then I headed off to the antique shop where I bought almost everything again, followed by a quick detour to the hardware store for a drinks booster and more shelves and coolers. Back at the store, I set up my new equipment and checked the computer, only to realize that I finally had enough reward points to unlock the scanner. I quickly breezed through the tutorial because really, how hard could scanning be? Turns out, I knew the concept. Rotate the items to the correct side and scan it. But I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to rotate the items. Meanwhile, the line is growing. I'd never seen a queue get that long. I'm panicking. And at this point, I was just keyboard mashing anything that I could, trying to figure out how to get this to scan. And thankfully, finally, throughout my keyboard smashes, I finally smashed a correct button. The rest of the shift was still chaos, but I did very slowly get everyone checked out. After closing, I hopped back on the computer and unlocked a new item for our inventory, coffee. I placed my order and stocked it immediately, and then I grabbed some apples and headed to the recycling center to attempt feeding the rats. But apparently, apples are not their thing. I haven't seen cheese anywhere yet, so I decided to make a trek up to the farm and see if there was any there. Instead of cheese, I found Carl outside his barn with a giant X marked on the doors. He explained to me that their Nisa, a mischievous farm spirit, had returned, and that these creatures only settle on ill-fated farms. According to Carl, the Nisa was to blame for his bad luck recently. We talked a little bit about trade deals, and I used my perk point to upgrade my crate capacity before ordering more oats. And then, just as I was about to leave, Carl dropped another bombshell. His sheep Fluffles had been kidnapped. Naturally, he blamed the Nisa and told me to keep an eye out. I kicked off day 20 at the hardware store, picking up a shiny new cooler and several more shelves. With all the new inventory items coming in, I just wanted to make sure I could stock as much as possible out on the floor. Back at the store, I set everything up, super proud of how organized that it looked, and then it was time to face my nemesis again, the scanner. And I still didn't get it. Still rotating items in the wrong direction, still mashing buttons. Thankfully, my customers were mostly patient with me, but I definitely have to get this figured out. Day 21 was a Sunday, which meant I got a day off from work. So I spent my morning trying to find something productive to do, chatting with some of the townspeople, when I found Tammy in the forest. She was randomly accusing me of selling her a moldy apple, but the real reason she was upset, she thought Barbara was spying on her. So she told me to be at the forest entrance at exactly 7 p.m. to catch Barbara in the act. Not wanting to stray too far, I looked around in the forest a little bit. I ended up stumbling across a strange little workshop, and that is where I found Fluffles. So I sent him trotting back to the farm, and I figured that I would fill in Carl later. When 7 o'clock rolled around, I was in position and ready, but no Barbara. So either I missed her or I failed. I needed to attempt to catch Barbara again, but with a full day of work ahead of me, that plan was gonna have to wait. My first stop was Tammy, where I placed an order for more crates of toothpaste, and then over to Barbara for a fresh batch of fishy sticks. Back at the shop, I got everything stocked, and I was actually doing a little bit better with the cash register today. I placed a huge order with delivery guy and got the storage room fully stocked, and honestly, it felt amazing seeing so much inventory neatly lined up. I decided to burn through a few more of my discounty reward points and add one more item to our selection, eggs. So a quick order later, and they were also on the way. And somehow, with the chaos of the workday, I completely forgot about looking for Barbara. My mission for day 23 was simple. I needed to remember to do all the things that I've been forgetting to do. First step was Carl's farm to talk to him about Fluffles, and he was thrilled to have Fluffles back and told me that he was the last sheep born before his dad passed away. But then Carl explained to me that it was culling season and he needed someone to mark the sheep that would be sent off to become roasts. He did offer to let me sell the roast at Discounty, and as tempting as it was, I wanted to find out why Hilda refused to do it this year. When I went to meet with Hilda, she told me that she didn't think it was fair to the sheep and had always tried to convince Carl to make sheep's cheese instead, but he'd never gone for it. So that's when she pitched me her plan. I needed to mark Fluffles along with the rest of the sheep to make Carl see how unfair it was that he was willing to sacrifice all of his other sheep, but he wanted to keep Fluffles. So I headed back to the farm and promptly marked every single sheep, including Fluffles. Now, of course, Carl was not thrilled about this, and just as Hilda had predicted, her plan worked. With that, our trade deal with Carl upgraded to Tier 2, meaning Discounty would now be selling sheep's cheese. So I grabbed the cheese, stocked it in the store, and opened up for the day. And it was on this day, day 23, that I finally figured out the scanner. By this time, I knew that WASD on my keyboard is what rotated the items. But for some reason, my brain was not processing how they were rotating, because I really just wanted to use A and D to rotate left or right. But this is the day that I realized that the keys WASD were linked to the directions of the barcodes. For example, produce has their barcode on the left, which means it's linked to the letter A. The barcodes for animal products were at the top, which means it's linked to W. Once I matched the direction of the barcode to the direction on my keyboard, I felt unstoppable. The scanner went from my most frustrating purchase to my favorite investment in the store. Now, with cheese in hand, I did want to go see if I could feed the rats, and what do you know, it worked. After feeding them, I heard noises coming from the sewer grates and discovered that the sewers were actually linked to other sections of the town. Now, last on my to-do list, spying on Barbara to see if she was spying on Tammy. So I waited at the forest entrance and followed her in. Keeping far enough back to avoid detection, I trailed her all through the forest until she finally did catch me. So I came clean, told her what I was doing, and she insisted that she wasn't spying on anyone. I'm not entirely convinced. I woke up to the news that the water in Blomkast had been contaminated, turned entirely pink of all things, and Aunt Heller didn't seem overly concerned, at least not when it came to the birds' well-being. I headed to the forest to share my findings with Tammy about Barbara, and I told her that I didn't think Barbara was spying on her, but Tammy wasn't buying it. Still, she decided to upgrade our trade deal to Tier 2 anyway, meaning that I would now be selling plastic straws. So I loaded up my crates and made my way to work. 2 trade deals upgraded in just a few days. Our supermarket empire was really starting to take shape. With all of these new products rolling in, shelf space was starting to become an issue, so I did make a quick run to the hardware store for some more shelves, and on the way back, I spotted Solruna outside of the Cursed But Curious shop. She told me that it used to be hers and she still kept gems stored inside, and something about demons being sent to ruin her business. Back at Discounty, I set up all of my new products, and thanks to my newfound scanner skills, the register was a breeze. My points in the rewards program were stacking up fast, and I was inching closer to unlocking all of the available items, but the one that I had my eye on the most was the extra 2 pocket spaces, so I went ahead and cashed in my points and claimed them. I started the day determined to add even more variety to the shop's inventory. My 1 discounting reward point went toward unlocking chocolate bars, which I ordered immediately, and that order gave me another points boost, so I also ended up unlocking energy drinks. My morning was spent getting both of those stocked and ready for the day. I had to make another run to the hardware store for a few more shelves and a processed food booster to make the most of my new products, and by the time the store opened, everything looked fantastic. At the end of my shift, I made one final rewards purchase for the day, the Discounty ad, which promised to bring in 10% more customers. Before heading home, I did stop in with Fisher to grab a few more crates of herring and then called it a night. Somehow, despite all of my stocking efforts the previous day, I still had things to organize before opening. Once everything was as ready as it could be, I took a quick trip to the antique store. She did have a few cute finds, but my eyes were on the rose quartz. I was kind of hoping that adding some of her crystals to my collection might boost my fortune at Discounty. And even if it doesn't, at least it's pretty. The store itself is running like clockwork at this point, and I'm not gonna lie, I might be the best cashier in Blomkast. After work, I stopped by Town Hall to pick up some ads to place around town because I needed a way to bring in more customers. We were inching closer and closer to the 8,000 shill goal, and I was hopeful that more foot traffic would mean more sales. I also stopped at the harbor where Barbara was waiting for me. I asked about upgrading our trade deal, and she finally agreed. Kind of. She told me about her latest idea, Fishy Fishies, which were fish sticks shaped like fish. But Poseidon's Galley headquarters hadn't officially approved it, so I would have to wait until tomorrow to see if it went through. Day 27 started in the forest with Tammy. I did have one perk point to spend, so I unlocked the advertising poster, which supposedly would make vendors' items appear more often on the customer shopping list. While I was out, I figured that I would swing by the harbor to check on my other trade deals, but Fisher was nowhere to be found. His home was locked and no one answered when I knocked, so it was time for me to start asking around town. Barbara had some bad news for me. The board would not greenlight her Fishy Fishies because they weren't convinced that there was a market for them, which they're probably not wrong. So she asked me to run a survey to ask 5 people if they would buy them for their hypothetical kids. My first stop was the bar where I asked Hilda about Fisher, and she told me that Carl and Fisher were supposed to meet up recently, but Fisher never showed up. And while I was there, I also asked her about Fishy Fishies, and she told me that it sounded like a cute idea. Now Chester, on the other hand, was far less impressed with the fish-shaped fish sticks. When I went to talk to Carl, he mentioned that Fisher had been acting strange lately. He told me the only way to truly know if Fisher was inside his shack was to knock 3 times. And his feelings about the fish sticks, completely neutral. So I made my way back to the harbor, knocked 3 times, and sure enough, the door opened. Fisher was inside listening to his radio, and he told me that he was fine, but in the way that people say that they're fine when they're not really fine. On my way back to town, I found half of the residents there waiting for me, not for an intervention, thank goodness, but because they were all worried about Fisher. The plan was to pitch in and help him get back on his feet, and my assignment was to keep his boat clean. After my eventful morning, my shift at Discounty felt super calm, and I wrapped up the day by unlocking the very last item in my rewards catalog, spaghetti. I still needed to survey 2 more people about the Fishy Fishes, so my first stop was the hardware store to ask Ted. And he gave them a slightly positive review, saying that they might make mealtime more fun. While I was there, I noticed that he had a coffee machine on display, so I grabbed that too. And apparently putting it in the store will speed up the customer's walking speed. Next, I stopped by the bank to ask Derek about the fish sticks. He told me that Chester would have loved them as a kid. And with 5 people surveyed, I returned to Barbara with my findings, and she told me we would find out tomorrow how it all went. Now, my favorite stop of the day, as always, was the antique store. Solruno was just constantly restocking with adorable items, so I picked out what I wanted and did a little bit of redecorating, and I still can't decide which floor I like better, but all of the plants everywhere make the store look so cute. I started my day by cleaning off Fisher's boat before heading to have a chat with Barbara. The good news, the Fishy Fishes got approved, which meant that Tier 2 of our trade deal was unlocked. So I would now be selling both Fishy Sticks and Fishy Fishes at Discounty. And with that, I only needed to upgrade 1 more trade deal. So I put the new fish sticks out on the shelves and immediately realized it was going to be a bit confusing. They looked so similar to the regular Fishy Sticks. I felt like stocking them might end up being a problem. Once I got everything organized, I had to admit this was the nicest the store layout had looked so far. On day 30, I walked to the harbor and finally found Fisher back by his boat. He didn't give much explanation about what had been wrong, but he was excited that the Blomkast periwinkle salmon were back and that he had caught some for me. And that meant our Tier 2 trade deal with Fisher was officially unlocked. I quickly stocked the salmon and dove into my workday, hopeful that I could complete the remaining tasks before talking to Derek about the loan again. The day went surprisingly well, and I had enough funds to cover the down payment on the loan. So I headed to the bank, handed Derek the 8,000 shills that I owed, and told him about all of my Tier 2 trade deals. But of course, he had one more task for me: hire an employee. I ran over to chat with Aunt Teller to share the good news about the loan and the bad news about the hiring, and she told me that we couldn't hire Grace and didn't really have any other suggestions on who I could hire, which was all very helpful. Derek greeted me on the morning of day 31, and I was not expecting the conversation that followed. He told me about Chester missing school and said he thought employing Chester at Discounty would help him get back on track. You've got to be kidding me. I tried to explain that I hadn't had a single successful interaction with Chester so far, but it didn't seem to matter. As if on cue, Chester was in the park with Elmer and apparently had destroyed Elmer's troll hazel tree. Chester had overheard the idea of working at Discounty, but didn't really seem interested. And then, in classic Chester fashion, he claimed he was going to show me business, whatever that meant. So I headed to Discounty, had another huge selling day, and went to bed, bracing myself for whatever Chester was going to do next. When I woke up on day 32, Chester had set himself up right outside Discounty with his very own lemonade stand. Is this kid serious? And if that wasn't enough, Aunt Teller was furious. She suggested that I help by slipping something into the lemonade to make sure that no one liked it. So what else am I gonna do? I went inside, gathered a few questionable options, and I settled on the shampoo. Now, thankfully, Miss Anderson wasn't interested in the lemonade, but Elmer was. So he decided to have a glass, and let's just say it did not go well. In the end, Elmer threatened to shut the stand down unless Chester did it himself. And then Chester's mom, Tammy, swooped in and told him that he had to finally take the job at Discounty. So I went back inside, worked what seemed to be my last solo shift, tried to embrace it, and then called it a day. The next morning, I swung by the antique shop, and I'm so glad that I did because she had the cutest bookshelf for sale. After that, I headed over to Discounty, and to my surprise, Chester was actually there, ready to work. I told him that his responsibility would be stocking the shelves, and despite my complete and total disdain for Chester, I had to admit that having help didn't sound so bad. With my new employee officially hired, I went back to the bank to let Derek know, and finally, I got the official loan agreement. I ran straight to Aunt Teller with the news, and she was absolutely thrilled. That's when she told me tomorrow she would reveal the second phase of the expansion. Back at Discounty, I worked my very first shift with Chester, and honestly, it was kind of nice being able to man the register while he handled the shelves. He even stayed late after the customers were gone, stocking all of the empty ones. At this rate, he might actually become Employee of the Month. On day 34, I met Aunt Teller by the shop just like she'd asked. Apparently, John Key, the so-called town hero who supposedly saved Blomkest with his invention, was a fraud. He stole the invention and passed it off as his own. And that's when she told me that the town was in need of a new hero, me. She also revealed Discounty's future plan. They wanted to expand into the John Key Museum. And let me tell you, the people of Blomkest were not going to like that. So that was my first 34 days in Discounty, and I feel like I've only just scratched the surface. Do we really know anything about John Key, and what's the story behind his stolen invention? Can we trust Aunt Teller? How is the town going to react when we try to expand into the John Key Museum? And what's going on with the rats? There's still so much to uncover, so if you want to see more Discounty content, let me know down in the comments below. I hope y'all enjoyed this. If you did, I'd appreciate if you'd like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.